Bully teacher likes to kick your belongings. This isn't my story. The revenge belongs to my friend. We'll call him Alan because that's not his name. Alan is a very laid-back, largish guy who seems very gentle. But in high school he had seething anger issues, especially with bullies, and this story was the culmination of those. Alan had a math teacher. Call him Barry because he was about that age. Barry liked to bully his students in ways that were scary but not actually violent. And being a math teacher, he was more predictable than creative. Barry owned his classroom and kept discipline by humiliating anyone who challenged him. He liked to stride along the aisles between the students' desk chairs, and he insisted on free space to stride in. When a student left belongings in the aisle, Barry would call the class's attention, wind up big, and kick the belongings extravagantly to the other end of the aisle and beyond, leaving the embarrassed student to clean up the chaos while everyone waited for the class to resume. Barry would smirk and say, "Now let's not see things in the aisle again." Not that there was anywhere else to put things. One day in November, Barry kicked a young lady's entire gym bag across the classroom, and her gym clothes scattered like the wind, her underthings landing on other students. She was mortified. Barry smirked, and Alan seethed. It had happened to Alan before, no big deal, but he was unwilling to let it go when it came to embarrassing the young lady. Alan began plotting his eventual revenge. In art class, Alan had been assigned a winter term sculpture project that could use any found material. He had decided to use nuts and bolts for December, but he listened carefully and knew that there would be a similar, higher marked project in the spring. He bided his time. Being a big guy, Alan decided his spring project would use bricks. Come January, he okayed the choice of materials with the art teacher. Then he sketched out his sculpture, showed where he'd obtain the materials, how and where the bricks would be used, how they'd be held together, and what the final product would look like. All material was to be brought into art class and left there in their storage over the course of the term while it was being worked with. Okayed that with the art teacher too. All this took 4 more weeks, but that was just fine. So in February, Alan brings 24 bricks to school, perhaps coincidentally on the day that art class immediately followed math class. And of course, what could be more convenient to carry them all in but a gym bag? There was no way for Alan to leave it in his locker between classes, since there wasn't time to get from math to his locker then to art, so he absolutely had to bring the bag to math class. Somehow, that gym bag was carelessly left projecting a foot or so into the aisle between the desk chairs. Math teacher Barry saw the bag, strode up the aisle, grinned, took a huge wind up, and the paramedics took Barry to the hospital, spitting and gasping, with a shattered foot. Of course, Alan expected a serious investigation afterward, but he had plotted everything with so much legitimacy, so much plausible deniability, that nobody could ever show deliberate intent. Most of the teachers, who knew what an asshole Barry was, suspected Alan of engineering the whole thing, but nobody could prove a thing. Alan looked contrite and kept his head down. But Barry wasn't back in math class until April, and he wasn't kicking any bags from his crutches. TLDR, predictable bully teacher likes to kick gym bags, finds bags of bricks less accommodating.
Hippity hoppity, you damaged my property. Bippity boppity, I'm calling the copity. Bippity boppity boo, they're taking your kids too. I apologize in advance for the length. TLDR at the end. This happened shortly after college. My mom is a retired, disabled woman who now owns her house on a quiet residential cul-de-sac. She has lived there longer than anyone else. Her neighborhood has designated parking spaces at the end of the cul-de-sac, all with the addresses of each house painted in the parking space. My mom doesn't get out much, so I use her designated parking space. At the time, we lived in the same city and I visited her weekly to bring groceries, fix broken things, cook for her, etc. My mom parked her car in the backyard of her house, since she went out so little. Mom kept busy by gardening or baking, buying cookies for the children on the street. Mom's neighbor, Ivy, never parked well. Whenever I stopped by, Her car was always parked so close to my car that I had to park on the curb. I wouldn't have cared about Ivy's piss-poor parking but for two things. 1. She had 4 or 5 kids and had parties almost every weekend, leaving trash in mom's yards. 2. I loved my car, a 2016 metallic ice blue Dodge Challenger Hellcat, the first car I had ever purchased brand new. I washed the car once a week, detailed the interior, and had rules against eating, drinking, or even leaving trash in my car. It was my pride and joy. Mom had called the police throughout Ivy's residence because of the parties. Ivy's guests would fill up the cul-de-sac with their cars, obstructing traffic, and get into loud, drunk fights at and after midnight. I often found empty beer bottles, empty condom wrappers, cigarette butts, and empty crack baggies on the fence between the properties, mostly on Ivy's side of the fence. This is all important information. One Saturday while having dinner at mom's house, I heard a loud crash and my car alarm went off. I ran outside to see Ivy's older model Honda Accord back out of her parking space and speed down the street. Ivy's Accord had a dent from the front bumper to the door and the headlight had popped out. I approached my Challenger with trepidation and screamed in anguish at what I saw. My car, my beautiful 3-week-old car with less than 500 miles on it, had a dent stretching from the passenger's door to the front bumper and the right front wheel was tilted at a 30-degree angle. I was livid and in anguish as I called the police, filed an online claim with my insurance, and arranged for a tow truck to take my damaged car to the dealership. The estimated cost of repairs came out to $3,400. Total cost of repairs was eventually $6,500. I had a low insurance deductible, $100, but my car was parked and Ivy owed for the damages. For 2 weeks, I knocked on Ivy's door or waited for her to come home. She stopped driving her damaged Accord and either rented or borrowed a Ford Fusion. When she was home, she didn't answer the door. When she wasn't, she stayed away until my rental car, a Dodge Charger, left mom's parking space. I left a note on Ivy's door for her to call me, but only received harassing calls from restricted phone numbers or people blaring air horns in my ear when I answered. The Revenge. About 2 weeks after the accident, Ivy's children came to mom's house for some cookies. I noticed that 2 of them had bruises around their eyes. If Ivy hadn't hit my car, I still would have done what I did, but maybe not as underhandedly. I had mom take pictures with and of the children but waited until the next party to strike. Ivy had a party that night or the night after. Mom called me to let me know and I installed an app onto my phone that gave me a fake phone number. I called 911 and reported the party. There's a loud party at 1007 Mountain Drive, and I'm worried because the children are around all these drunk adults. Please, hurry. Mom called to let me know the police had arrived. I drove to her house, stopping by the grocery store first, so that appeared to be the reason, and saw Ivy and her boyfriend Bane already sitting in the back of a squad car. From a news broadcast that night, I found out that Bane had warrants out for his arrest. Initially, the charges were disorderly conduct and disturbing the peace. However, Mom turned over the photos of the children, anonymously mailing them through the post office with Ivy's address and name as the return address. Less than a week later, Ivy and Bane were charged with child abuse charges. I think Bane was charged with more severe charges as well for abusing Ivy's daughter. Either way, the children ended up in foster care, and Ivy and Bane ended up in prison. TLDR, my car was hit by such a foul witch. Being a pro, I played a snitch. Her children had bruises. She had no excuses. My plan went well, no hitch.
Guy speeds out of his driveway every day without looking. I think I may have fucked him up mentally forever. Small piece of background info. As a kid I was always playing rough and at some point even thought about becoming a stuntman. Actually, that still sounds like an awesome career. So me and my friends did the whole fake fighting thing and I learned how to easily take hits and pretty nasty falls without getting hurt badly. I was one of those kids that always had cuts and bruises and no idea how I got them. Nor did I care. I also have always had the superpower to cause myself a bloody nose just by picking a very specific spot. This may not sound like a superpower, but if you didn't study for a test, it was a God's gift to be able to just walk out of the classroom with a bloody nose knowing you could retake it at another time. This story happened a couple of years ago, and it may be the worst thing I ever did. I was 17 years old, and being Dutch, I rode my bike everywhere. I live pretty close to my grandparents and would bike past their house on a daily basis. Their house was at the corner of a Y-shaped intersection. And there was this guy who lived on the same intersection who was the worst driver I ever met. He would just not look when driving out of his garage and just speed into the road. He had nearly hit me twice already, and every time he just cursed at me to get out of his way. Now you have to believe me when I say this, but I am not a vengeful person. But something about this just annoyed me so much. My grandma also loves to ride her bike around town to do the groceries. And I knew I had to do something before my grandma would get hit. I asked my grandma about the man, and she told me what I already knew. The guy was an asshole and everyone did everything wrong except for him. I told my grandma what I was planning and if she would help me. She wholeheartedly agreed, and together we made a plan to teach him a lesson he would never forget. I decided to hang out around the guy's house for a couple of weeks to take note of when he left for work every day and how fast he was going. I worked everything out to the smallest detail. No room for errors on this one. I started practicing my falls again and looked up some tutorials to prepare myself for the performance of a lifetime. One sunny Monday morning, I get up and start stretching and warming up my muscles. Today is the day. I grab my bike and drive it just around the corner of the guy's garage. I mentally prepare myself and start my bloody nose with ease, making sure to get nice and bloody in the process. Then I hear it. The garage door opens. I now have 3.7 seconds before he would be racing out of his garage. Like I said, every detail. No room for error. I start driving my bike as fast as I could and get ready for the impact. And let me tell you, it went beautifully. I was no longer sitting on my seat and had my left hand already off my handlebar to help with the impact of the car. I rolled over the hood and windshield of his car and landed in a nice rolling motion as I thought myself all those years ago. I ended up hitting the ground on the passenger side of the car. All in all, the whole accident took less than a second, but I still remember it as if it happened in slow motion. The guy was freaking out as he thought he just killed a guy, and if you were just looking at the amount of blood on his car, it wasn't that much, but on a white car every drop stands out, you would agree. As I laid there next to his car, he came screaming out asking if I was okay. Of course I pretended I wasn't and took my sweet ass time trying to get up. It was at this point that my grandma came running out of her house right on cue screaming, "My baby. You hit my grandson." The guy didn't know what to do. He was so full of shock that I thought he may pass out. I'll give him credit. He kept his cool and knew he was in the wrong. He called me an ambulance and stayed by my side. When they arrived, they checked me out. I was fine. A couple of bruises and a small scratch on my knee from hitting the pavement. They bandaged me up and left. My grandma brought me to her car and brought me home. A couple days later, I ride my bike past the guy's house again and notice a piece of paper on one of the car's windows. "For sale, call 06. I ask my grandma what happened, and word on the street is that the accident left him traumatized and now he refuses to drive anymore, taking public transit everywhere and selling his car. My grandma is happy that she can ride her bike without having to worry, and I am happy that I don't have to worry for her life. We talked about it afterwards and both of us agree that although what we did was a horrible thing to do to someone, it had to be done before someone would actually get hurt, and we don't feel any remorse about it. TLDR, after being almost hit twice by a reckless driver and fearing for my grandmother's life, I decided to turn full-on stuntman and mentally scar the 45-year-old driver by making him cause an accident that left him refusing to drive and selling his car.